So during our last NHL 18 simulation, we simulated the Stanley Cup playoffs, and NHL 18 predicted that the Los Angeles Kings would beat the Tampa Bay Lightning in the Stanley Cup Finals. And so far, that whole scenario is not looking all too good for LA Kings fans. But with the AHL playoffs beginning on Friday, I thought we might as well do a simulation for the Calder Cup playoffs and see which AHL team will be taking home that prized trophy. So let's get going with it. Hey guys, what is going on today? Bojo here, and as I mentioned, today we're going to be doing a simulation for the Calder Cup playoffs to see which AHL team is going to win it all. So guys, make sure you go hit that thumbs up button down below and leave your predictions down below to see which team you think NHL 18 is going to predict to win the Calder Cup. Now, unlike the Stanley Cup simulation that we ran, I'm not going to edit up any of the rosters for the AHL squads. I just updated it to the most recent roster update, and whatever the AHL lines are, those are what we are going to run with. But first, let's show you guys which teams actually ended up making the AHL playoffs here in 2018. So to start, we have the Chicago Wolves up against the Rockford Ice Hogs. So Chicago, if you guys remember, is a joint AHL team consisting of players from both the St. Louis Blues and the Vegas Golden Knights. And they're up against Rockford, which is Chicago's AHL team. Next up, we have the Grand Rapids Griffins up against the Manitoba Moose, so Detroit versus Winnipeg. Next up, the Tucson Roadrunners against the San Jose Barracuda, Arizona versus San Jose. And then finally, the Texas Stars up against the Ontario Reign, Dallas versus LA. As we move over to the eastern side, we have the Lehigh Valley Phantoms up against the Providence Bruins, obviously my Philadelphia Flyers up against the Boston Bruins. The Wilkes-Barre Scranton Penguins against the Charlotte Checkers, that would be Pittsburgh versus Carolina. Toronto Marlies up against the Utica Comets, so Toronto versus Vancouver. And then finally the Syracuse Crunch against the Rochester Americans, Tampa Bay versus Buffalo. So as you guys know, the first round of the AHL playoffs is a little bit different than the NHL. It is only a 5-game series for round number 1. So what we're going to do is we're going to start the playoff simulation. We're going to run through the first round matchups. We're going to see which teams come out of it, and then we're going to reload the playoff bracket once again, and then take it from there with those 8 teams that move on and do the best of 7 series all the way to the Calder Cup. All right, so here we are in the playoff mode. Once again, as I mentioned, round 1 is only a 5-game series, so we're going to do the simulating for these first round matchups, and then we'll see which teams are moving on. Alright, so we're wrapping up our first round matchups here, and as you guys can see, we're actually going to have 4 game number 5s to end off this first round. To wrap up the first 4 games, though, that have finished, Chicago ended up beating Rockford in 3 games, 3-0. Manitoba beat the Grand Rapids Griffins in 4. Providence, unfortunately, upset my Lehigh Valley Phantoms 3-1. And then Utica actually upset Toronto as well, 3-1. So let's go wrap up these last 4 series matchups here, Tucson and San Jose. And it looks like the Tucson Roadrunners are going to walk away with that one. Ontario versus Texas, and Texas walks away with that. Charlotte versus Wilkes-Barre Scranton, Charlotte Checkers come away with that. And then finally, Rochester versus Syracuse, and it looks like the Rochester Americans are going to walk away with that one. All right. So there's our round 2 matchups. We have Manitoba versus Chicago, Texas versus Tucson, Providence versus Charlotte, and Utica versus Rochester. So before I move on to relaunching the sim, I just thought if you guys were following at home and you want to see who the leading point totals are, there you go. Looks like Travis Morin and Brian Flynn are the 2 leading point getters so far for Texas, 9 points apiece for them. Michael Mersch and Dennis Gurinov as well up there with 8 points. Jason Dickinson and CJ Smith also with 7. So it looks like Texas is really pulling their weight here in the playoffs. 4 out of the top 5 players so far in the AHL for points are all from Texas. So There's the point totals for everybody right there. As you guys can see, I'll just skim through it really quickly. Obviously, you can stop me anywhere you please. And then the goaltender stats really quickly. Once again, that is what they look like. Thatcher Demko, top of the board right there. But there is everybody else who has the 3 wins that they needed. Alright guys, so we have reloaded the sim once again. All the matchups are set up accordingly with the proper seeds playing the proper seeds. So let's go through round number 2 here. 7-game series. Let's see which teams are going to be moving on to the conference finals. Alright guys, so we're coming down to our last matchup here of round number 2. As you can see already, Tucson beat Texas in 6. Providence ended up sweeping Charlotte. Utica beat Rochester in 5. And now Manitoba and Chicago are going to a Game 7. Chicago was up 3-0 in this series, and they've blown a 3-0 lead. So let's see if the reverse sweep is indeed coming from Manitoba, or if Chicago is going to pull out on top. They are going to pull out a Game 7 victory and move on to the conference finals. So, our 4 remaining teams are the Tucson Roadrunners up against the Chicago Wolves, which would be Arizona versus the combination of St. Louis and Vegas. And then the Providence Bruins up against the Utica Comets, Boston versus Vancouver. Well, that's a very familiar rivalry. So, let's get going here with our conference finals matchups, and let's see which 2 teams EA thinks is going to meet in the Calder Cup. Alright, so one of the first rounds is already done, as Chicago, after blowing a 3-0 lead, they make sure that doesn't happen again. They sweep the Tucson Roadrunners out in 4 games to move on to the Calder Cup. And it looks like Providence is already up 3-0 over the Utica Comets as well. They could join Chicago in the Calder Cup finals, which I believe they will. So 2 sweeps in the conference finals to lead up to these 2 teams. The Providence Bruins are undefeated currently in this back half of the simulation. I forget if they lost 1 to Lehigh Valley. So technically I think they're like, what is it? 11-1 so far in the playoffs right now. They're 11-1. That's a pretty damn good record right now that the Providence Bruins are on. So we have Boston's AHL team versus the combined efforts of Vegas and St. Louis in Chicago. So a very interesting team. All right, so before we get started with this Calder Cup Finals matchup, I thought I would briefly show you guys the lineups that each of these 2 teams are going to be running. Starting with Providence, it looks like Justin Hickman, Austin Cernak, and Peter Karalik on line number 1, Josh Hennessy, Colby Cave, and Kenny Agostino on line number 2, Chris Porter, Ryan Fitzgerald, and Jacob Forsbacka Carlson on line number 3, and then Anton Bly, I'm assuming that's what it is, Anton Bly, Zach Senishin, and Jordan Suarez, I don't know, on line number 4. Defensively, Emil Johnson or Johansson, Chris Breen, Tommy Cross, Senna Acalaste? I don't know. And then Jacob Saboril and Paul Postma for defensively. Goaltender is Jordan Binnington with Zane McIntyre as the backup. Alright, and now if we go over to the Chicago Wolves side of things, it's definitely not a surprise that this team definitely made it that far. Wade Megan, TJ Tynan, and Teemu Pulkkinen on line number 1. Line number 2, Brandon Peary, Bo Bennett, and Paul Thompson. That's almost consistent NHL players right there. Brandon Peary and Bo Bennett, like 277s on line number 2. Line number 3, Stefan Matteau, Tobias Lindberg, and Thomas Heike. Line number 4, Brett Sterling, Mackenzie McEachran, and Keegan Kolsar. It's a pretty damn good AHL offense. Defensively, Chris Casto and Petteri Lindbaum, Griffin Reinhart, Scooter Vaughn, Jason Garrison, and Jake Bischoff on defense. Goaltending, Oscar Dansk and Maxime Legacy for the Tendies. So Chicago has that joint effort between St. Louis and Vegas, and yeah, they're a pretty damn good team. Alright, so now that you guys have seen the lineups, let's get to simming and let's see which team is going to take home the Calder Cup. So game 1 is going to go in favor of Chicago. Game number 2 is also going to go in favor of Chicago. Game number 3 taken by the Providence Bruins to make it a 2-1 series. Game number 4 goes to the Chicago Wolves, who are already up 3-1 in the series, looking to close it out. So let's do an in-game simulation here for game number 5 that the Calder Cup is in the building. First period, 1-0 lead, Heika on Binnington. Second period, 2-1, Polkinen gets one, Hickman does get one back on Oscar Dansk. Third period, is Chicago going to win the Cup this year? Yes, they are. But Terry Lindbaum gets one. Fitzgerald tried to make it a game late, but unfortunately came up a little bit short. And the joint effort, who actually gets to celebrate here? Does St. Louis take more credit or does Vegas take more credit? Whatever the fact is, the joint effort team between the Vegas Golden Knights and the St. Louis Blues looks like it's going to pay off in EA's simulation, where the Chicago Wolves will pull out the Calder Cup here in 2018. Alright, so like I said, it's going to be tough to gauge the point totals, obviously with 2 different series of simulations, but in the back half of this simulation, looks like Cernak picked up 14 points in 13 games for him, so a really good job. Megan, Tynan both picked up 13. Polkinen, Thompson, and Peary all picked up 12, so a lot of former NHL players right there, but they're thriving in the AHL, that's for damn sure. Karalik with 11, Heika with 10, Chaput and Time again right there with 8 points in the 9 and 10 games that they played, and Zach McEwen with 7 points in 9 games. Those are the most point totals there from the skaters. Goaltenders, Oscar Dansk had one heck of a backhand series, 12-3-1, .948 save percentage, goals against average under 1.5, pretty damn ridiculous. This is what the bracket's going to look like. Obviously, you saw the first round matchups, obviously, but these are the final 8 teams, and it looks like Chicago going all the way to win the Calder Cup this year. So thank you guys for watching. If you did enjoy, make sure to leave a like, comment, and subscribe as always. Once again, leave down in the comments section your real life predictions, who you think is going to win the Calder Cup this year, and also if I think I should do any more playoff simulations. I know the ECHL playoffs hopefully will be starting up soon as well, so maybe we can do a simulation for that. If there's any international leagues you guys want me to do, leave that down below as well. Other than that, I'll catch you guys next time. Peace.